Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Laurel Whitney, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. We have a wonderful program planned for you. To start us off, I'd like to introduce to you our Director of the Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division, Karima Newman.
Good evening. Thank you, Laurel, so much. And good evening to everyone who's here with us this evening. I am Karima Newman, and I am the Director of the Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division here in EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in Region 4. I would like to welcome you to our introductory environmental.
Yeah. So if we go to another one or whatever, whenever they have.
I would like to ask everyone to mute, and can we do a global mute, please? I would like to welcome you to our introductory environmental enforcement webinar. Firstly, thank you for taking the time to share your evening with us for this event. We are so excited to bring this webinar to you all to tell you more about how the Environmental Protection Agency enforces our federal laws through inspections and compliance monitoring. Inspections and compliance monitoring are the activities and are the backbone for our division and fulfills the EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment. We are also grateful to have our state partners join us this evening from Georgia Environmental Protection Division to tell you more about how they protect Georgia's environment through state laws and monitoring. Over the next hour and a half, we will give you details on how we conduct inspections, develop cases when violations are found, and how communities can engage in the process. We will also tell you more about Clean Air Act inspections happening in the Augusta, Georgia area this spring, in line with the EPA's national initiatives. So thank you once again for being with us. And I will now turn it over to Sean Taylor of Georgia's Environmental Protection Division. Sean.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Karima. My name is Sean Taylor, and I am the manager of the Stationary Source Compliance Program with the Air Protection Branch in the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. And we also have Jeffrey Williams, who is manager of our district office in Augusta. It's the East Central District Office that's responsible for several counties in and around the Augusta area. I think there's about 15 counties total in their district. And we're both going to be giving presentations later on, so you'll hear from both of us about what we're responsible for in the Augusta area for the EPD as a whole. And then I'm going to talk about more specific about the Air Branch side of things, just because that is the focus of the EPA inspections that are going to be coming up in Augusta later this year.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Karima. Let's get our program started. So tonight we're going to give you a basic overview of how we enforce environmental laws here in the Southeast. We're going to tell you more about how we conduct inspections, how we develop our cases, and how the community can become involved in the process. If at any point you have a question, please feel free to put your question into the Q&A box in front of your screens. We have a number of people behind the scenes here that are available to answer your questions. And if we think there's something we want to highlight, we've slotted Q&A time after each of the presentations as well. There will also be a recording posted on our website, which we'll give you more information about at the end in case you have anybody else you want to know that wants to view the program that was not able to make it tonight. The Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division was created about 5 years ago. It used to be that enforcement was intertwined with the programs or the regulatory section. So it would just be air or water or chemicals. But a few years ago, they separated enforcement out. There's two main pathways to enforcement. Most people are probably familiar with criminal enforcement, but the way that our division works is through civil enforcement and through inspections. We can refer severe cases to our criminal investigations division, and vice versa, they can also refer cases to us as well. But there are some basic differences. With civil enforcement, we enforce a broad range of violations, versus criminal enforcement largely focuses on severe violations that are committed either knowingly or intentionally. So for example, if I put toxics into a body of water, there's a big difference between if I do it accidentally versus if I do it on purpose. And so criminal will focus more on the people who do it on purpose, and civil can take care of a lot of other scenarios, including accidental releases. Both of our divisions usually include some kind of monetary penalty, but civil enforcement is very much focused on making sure we return facilities to compliance and that any cleanups or remediation happens if need be. An additional difference is that with criminal enforcement, violators can also have a criminal record based on their charges or a potential prison sentence. So the Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division, also known as ECAD, is responsible for developing and implementing enforcement and compliance assurance programs in the Southeast. And that includes all the things you see in front of you on the slide. We plan where we need to go every year in areas of priority. We monitor areas that we think need more attention. We develop our cases with our regional council, and that includes things like negotiating our settlements and assigning penalties if need be. And we also measure results. We measure our results through things like environmental benefits. So for example, how many pounds of pollution did we reduce? Or was there an elimination of imminent and substantial endangerment through our actions? Or are we seeing improvements in health results? ECAD also works with other federal agencies along with state and tribal partners to ensure compliance with environmental laws and regulations. And we rely a lot on our partners to help us complete inspections throughout the region. Nationwide, we have about 860 inspectors. They conducted 7,700 inspections nationwide last year in 2023. And about 2/3 of those were in areas with environmental justice concerns, meaning in communities that we can think are either overburdened or underserved. In the Southeast specifically, we have about 100 inspectors. And those 100 inspectors are responsible for over 200,000 facilities in the region. And we rely a lot on our state and local inspectors to increase those inspections. So those numbers you see in front of you don't include all the inspections that happen because they only include the federal numbers. Last year, we did about 912 inspections, and of those 70% had an environmental justice focus, which surpassed our goals. And our goals are set alongside our nationwide EPA or agency strategic plan. Here you see is how our division is broken down. So focusing in more, you see that we have several sections. We have a section for air, we have water, and then we have chemical safety and land, which comprises of pesticides, toxic substances, and hazardous waste. And water and air are also broken down into subsections. We also have a technical support branch, which provides necessary training and credentialing to our inspectors and also technical assistance, for example, putting on events like these. And also we have a data management section to handle all the data that comes in from our inspections. So tonight, our presentation is broken down into 3 parts. Again, we're going to tell you more details about how we do inspections, how we develop cases and decide which enforcement actions are appropriate, and how the community can even become engaged in the enforcement process and how we rely on you. So to start off, we're going to talk more about compliance monitoring. And here to talk tonight to that topic is Rosalind Hughes Fairley, an inspector in the Air Enforcement Division. Rosalind?
Good evening. As been said earlier, my name is Rosalind Hughes Fairley, and I am an inspector in the Air Enforcement Branch in the Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division. I've been with the agency for over 35 years, and I will briefly talk about the environmental programs and regulation, the relationship between EPA, state and local environmental agencies, how EPA chooses areas to conduct inspections, and what inspectors do during, before, during, and after the inspection. Next slide, please. Let's start with a simple comparison. Here you see a speed limit, a young man, and a fast car. When the speed limit is enforced by law enforcement, the young man in the fast car is kept safe, as well as the surrounding community. The same is true with environmental laws and environmental regulators and the regulated community. Next slide, please. This slide, you will see illustrations for the goals of environmental laws. Here you have a rusty pipe with brown water coming out of it. It doesn't appear clean. Our next picture shows a crystal clear body of water that is regulated by the NPDES program and appears to be clean. That is the goal of environmental regulations. Another picture is a garbage dump on fire. The next picture, you'll see a landfill that is controlled with the required regulations of a liner and monitoring. Our next slide shows smokestacks with black and brown smoke coming out of them, which isn't a good look, compared to the next picture where the stack has water vapor or steam coming out of it. The next slide you'll see is Donora, Pennsylvania in 1948. Emissions from a copper smelter, as you can see in the background of the picture, the pipes with the smokestacks, combined with a temperature inversion that occurred and caused an environmental incident, resulting in the deaths of 20 people and thousands of more folks getting sick. The next slide is a picture of a metropolitan area under today's environmental regulations. As we continue with more pictures, you see a picture of just drums scattered everywhere, compared to an organized drum site. Now, the other areas that we inspect that you may not realize are agricultural sites, underground storage tanks, construction site runoff, and again, waste storage sites. Let's move on to the environmental programs. We have water, the programs EPA has are water, which includes drinking water, storm water, wastewater, groundwater, and of course, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. We have the air program, toxic substances, pesticides, and land waste. And as we move on, the major programs align with the environmental laws, such as Clean Water, Safe Drinking Water Act, Toxic Substance Control Act, Emergency Planning and Right to Know, Clean Air Act. As we continue, you have these regulations. Now what? They have to be enforced. One way to do that is through an inspection. Inspections provide a regulatory presence, a greater way of gathering information, and thoroughly evaluating a facility. As mentioned earlier, this region has over 200,000 facilities, and Region 4 has less than 100 inspectors. To accomplish the inspections, EPA relies on our partners, the state and local environmental agencies, as well as the tribal agencies, to assist with providing a regulatory presence by conducting inspections and enforcement. EPA is the primary authority for enforcing environmental regulations. Since Region 4 can't be everywhere in this region all the time, EPA has delegated its enforcement authority for several environmental programs to our state and local and tribal environmental partners. In the delegated programs, EPA relies on the state and local programs and tribal programs for inspections and enforcement. Also, next slide, those delegated programs cannot be less stringent than the federal programs. There are some programs, however, that cannot be delegated to our partners, and EPA keeps the primary enforcement authority role. That is called direct implementation, such as the reporting of toxic chemical releases and the inspection and enforcement for the deletion of emission controls from vehicles, marine vessels, and other mobile sources. With over 200,000 facilities, and this slide, you will see all the areas that EPA, got my slides mixed up, where you see EPA provides funding and technical expertise, and the states do the case referrals and training as well. As we move on to our next slide, with over 200,000 facilities in the region, Region 4 has to prioritize our resources to determine areas of focus for our inspections. So how do we do this? The region uses general criteria to choose areas to focus on for inspections, such as geographical location, facility size, response to emerging concerns, new science, or formal requests from EPA headquarters. The region also uses criteria from citizens' complaints, referrals from local governments, and national initiatives that was mentioned earlier, such as the National Initiatives for Compliance and Enforcement in Reducing Air Toxics in Overburdened Communities. You were invited to this webinar this evening because you were part of the Southeast Augusta community, which has been identified as a potentially overburdened community. As overburdened communities is defined as a minority, low income, tribal, indigenous population community that potentially experiences disproportionate environmental harm and risk due to exposure to environmental hazards. We have chosen an area in which to focus for inspections. Now let's talk about what an inspection is. To conduct an inspection, the inspectors have to review the regulations, permits, and reports submitted by the facility chosen for the inspection. Inspectors also review the information submitted to state and local regulatory agencies, such as inspection reports and monitoring reports. The inspectors are concerned also about their safety and prepare health and safety plans, which include basic information on the location and phone numbers of hospitals, police, and fire departments. So when the inspectors get to the facility to conduct the walkthrough, we will be prepared. So questions are asked during the walkthrough. Observational data is recorded, and sometimes samples are collected. We'll talk a little bit more about samples. Next slide. Samples are collected to check compliance. Samples such as air, water, and soil may be collected and sent by agency labs, and they're sent there to be analyzed as well. The region has a lab in Athens, and we also utilize the national lab located in Colorado to collect and analyze our samples. Next slide. We also have a special monitoring piece of equipment for air emissions. It's called a forward-looking infrared camera. With this camera, emissions can be seen that typically are not seen with the naked human eye. So next slide. So once the inspectors, we've completed the walkthrough, we've gathered our data, now we return to the office. The data that we collected and the records that we have reviewed are evaluated. If more information is needed, an information request is sent. If not, the observations are written up in an inspection report. If no further action is needed, the report is finalized and sent to the facility. If non-compliance is found, management and the agency attorneys are consulted for a decision on how to proceed. Then the case development process starts. Now, I'll turn the presentation over to our state partners at the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. Thank you so much.
All right, and next up we have Jeffrey Williams with Georgia EPD. Jeffrey, please go ahead and put your presentation in slideshow whenever you're ready.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you for that. I am Jeffrey Williams. I'm with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division's East Central District Office, which is located here in Augusta. So what we do is the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. We're the state agency that takes the lead in ensuring clean air, water, and land. We work with our partners to help ensure a sustainable environment that provides a foundation for both a vibrant economy and healthy communities. It's our vision that the natural resources are to be protected and managed not just for our generations, but for future generations as well. So what does EPD do? We write and adopt regulations based on federal and state laws. We issue environmental permits. We monitor the environment, and we provide both education and technical support to communities. So EPD is divided into 3 different media-based programs. We have our air branch, which Sean will give to you a little more information about in a few minutes. We have our land protection branch, and those are things such as our landfills, hazardous waste sites, and we have our asbestos, lead-based paint programs, and surface mines. We also have our watershed protection branch, which we go out and we look at wastewater facilities, we look at drinking water facilities, and we do other things such as conduct river and stream monitoring. And then we have the district offices. Throughout the state, there are 7 district offices. And basically the primary goal of the district offices are we're the boots on the ground, and we provide technical support to communities. And we also do the compliance evaluations. And we're kind of the first point of communication for the regulated community as well as others in the community. And our district offices are located in Brunswick, Augusta, Atlanta, Cartersville, Athens, Albany, and Macon. And I will turn it over to Sean Taylor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. My name is Sean Taylor again. I'm the manager of the Stationary Source Compliance Program in the Air Protection Branch of the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. And I'm going to provide a broad overview of what we do in the Air Branch as a whole, and the compliance program specifically, and touch on a few points specific to the area that we're all here to talk about in Augusta. So we have 6 programs in the air protection branch, starting with our planning and support program, which houses the staff who write our rules for Georgia and implement state plans to meet federal regulations, the people who run models to estimate the effects of facility emissions on local areas and even regional effects for groups of facilities, and also the staff who collect emissions data that feeds into these models. Next, we have our stationary source permitting program, which issues air quality permits for facilities throughout the state. They incorporate state and federal regulations to describe the operating limits, monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements that facilities are required to abide by. Next is our stationary source compliance program, who ensures that facilities are operating in compliance with those air quality permits through inspections, report reviews, stack tests, and taking enforcement action when those requirements are not being met. This program also houses our risk management program for the safe storage of large amounts of hazardous chemicals, primarily ammonia and chlorine in Georgia. And finally, the Small Business Environmental Assistance Program also resides in the program to assist small businesses with permitting and compliance questions. Next is our ambient monitoring program, who monitor pollutants across the state with nearly 40 monitoring stations, monitoring pollutants such as ozone, particulate matters, sulfur dioxide, and hazardous air pollutants. Next, our mobile and area sources program monitors and enforces the vehicle emissions testing stations in Metro Atlanta, and also ensures that gasoline stations are using appropriate vapor recovery tools. And finally, our radiation protection programs ensure that users of radioactive materials are using them in an appropriate manner, and also conduct emergency preparedness exercises for the nuclear power plants that affect Georgia, which are the 2 that we have in the state and also one in Alabama that's right on the border. Since the primary reason we're here is due to upcoming EPA inspections in the area, I'm going to focus on the compliance program and what we do. The key component of what we do is based on inspecting facilities on a regular basis. So depending on the facility's emissions, the inspection frequency will vary, but we conduct about 400 inspections per year throughout the state to ensure that facilities are operating in compliance with their permit. We go through each condition to verify that, which would take anywhere from 15 minutes to 3 days for some inspections. Next, many facilities are required to submit periodic reports describing whether or not they deviated from the requirements of their permit. And they may be required to submit those either quarterly, semi-annually, or on an annual basis, just depending on what the permit requires. Then, depending on what we observe during inspections and reports, we may take enforcement action if the facility is not meeting the terms of their permit, whether that's failure to maintain records, not operating a control device in an appropriate manner, or exceeding emissions limits. Many facilities are also required to conduct performance tests to demonstrate compliance with emissions limits. This could be a one-time test or on a specified frequency, depending on the likelihood that the limits may be exceeded. Finally, even though we don't handle nearly as many as the district offices that Jeffrey manages, we handle complaints against facilities assigned to the air branch. So the district offices throughout the state probably handle about 90% of the complaints we get throughout the state. But if it's a facility that's assigned to the air branch, we're going to take those complaints and work with the district offices sometime if it's something that they need to get to right away. Because again, they're throughout the state and we're based locally in and around Atlanta. And then locally, since we're in Augusta and talk about Augusta, air inspectors in the air branch and the East Central District Office are responsible for inspecting 33 facilities in Richmond County. 10 of these are considered major sources, such as the paper mill, brick manufacturing facilities, and some of the large chemical plants, like PCS, for example. And then 23 facilities are considered synthetic minor, which means they have taken operational limits or installed controls to reduce their emissions below, those major source thresholds. And then out of those 400 inspections conducted statewide, we do about 10 to 15 per year in Richmond County. Facilities also conduct approximately 55 stack tests per year in the county out of about 1,200 per year throughout the state. And then, as I noted previously, most of these facilities are required to self-report any deviations from their permit requirements on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. As far as enforcement goes in the area, there have been 55 notices of violation issued to Richmond County facilities in the past 10 years. That compares to about 900 throughout the state. So, pretty typical as far as like the number of facilities in Richmond County relative to the rest of the state. That's, they're about on par the rest of the state. So no more, no less on average per facility. And then we have issued 12 consent orders and collected a total of $71,000 and $71,027 in settlements during that time frame, which sounds like a lot, But for comparison, we executed a consent order last week that was over $72,000 by itself. Like I said, just to a single facility for violations at that one. So I would say, generally speaking, facilities in Augusta and Richmond County are doing pretty well in meeting those environmental limits for the air quality permits. So that's all I have for you. Here's my contact information if you have any questions later.
Thank you so much, Sean and Jeffrey. Okay, so we're at our first breaking point for Q&A. I don't see any questions so far in the Q&A box. I just want to remind everybody that if you do have a question, you can put it in our Q&A box. And the way you do that is you should have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If for some reason you don't see it, you may want to look for another button that says more with 3 dots, and that should also bring you to Q&A. So in the meantime, we're going to keep moving on ahead. And if we get any more questions, we'll answer them and potentially bring them up at the next, after the next presentation. So you've just gotten a lot of information about how we do inspections, both at the federal level and our state partners, and all the work they're doing in enforcement as well. So with that, we're going to move on to the next section, and this is going to be our case development section. So speaking more on this part of the process is another air enforcement inspector, Stephen Reek.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Reek. I've been working with EPA since 2008 in the Air Enforcement Group alongside Rosalind. I'm here to discuss case development and resolution and basically how the EPA enforcement program works. So as we had started speaking, as Rosalind had spoken earlier about how we conduct our inspections and investigations, that's the first step of the process. And then after that, we take that information and begin the next compliance steps. Next slide, please. So with our enforcement program, of course, the main benefits are that everybody has the same rules and must play by the same rules. So every facility, any facility in Georgia and in Augusta, they would be subject to the same rules if they were stationed in Idaho or in downtown New York City. It doesn't matter. We have these federal rules to keep that consistency all around the country. And of course, we also work to promote deterrence as well by assessing civil penalties. Of course, if a company sees a similar company getting a penalty for a violation, they're going to want to make sure that they are also not violating to avoid that penalty. Next slide. So again, in the process, we have received all this information from these companies through our inspections and through our on-the-ground investigations. And now we are going to begin the process of determining whether a facility is in non-compliance. So what information are we using to determine compliance at a facility? Well, it's a lot. Of course, the inspection and inspection notes are vital to knowing what's going on with the company, but we won't limit it to just that. We'll also be looking at any pictures. We'll look at product labels. We'll do deep dives in all of their monitoring records, as well as process information, sampling, and we'll use all of this information to compare it to their permit and federal requirements to determine whether a facility is in compliance. Next slide. More specifically, when we're doing this review, some things that we'd be looking for is whether a facility is meeting their permitted limits. You know, we have limits generally for any type of process, whether it's for emissions into the air or into the water. We'll ensure that a company is using the correct control equipment to make sure that they're reducing emissions as required, and of course that they're monitoring, maintaining that equipment as well. We'll also look to make sure that they obtained the correct permitting before they began any process, as well as making sure that they are doing proper record keeping and reporting as well. And on the other side, sometimes it might be the facility that comes to us to let us know that they have a an issue that they believe is non-compliance. So we call this a self-disclosure. And of course, that's encouraged and also required in some cases. And usually by self-disclosing a violation, if they tell us before we find it ourselves, they can get a reduction in any assessed civil penalties. So after we take all this information and let's say we've determined that a facility is in fact not in compliance with their regulations, the next step will be make sure that we are all on board. You know, I, as a ground level inspector, may start the process where I believe a facility may not be in compliance, but I will also need to get concurrence from other stakeholders, including my management, our legal counsel, as well as our state partners as well, to determine that a facility is in non-compliance. And if everyone's on board, then we will go ahead and initiate an enforcement action. So here we are in the steps of the enforcement process. As I had said, we've made the decision that this facility is not in compliance, and we will initiate enforcement. Generally, as part of that decision, we will actually contact the company to let them know what we found, because we are wanting to hear what their side is and explain what's going on and perhaps any gaps that we're missing. Following that negotiation, we may go ahead and begin the enforcement action, which may be drafted and sent to the company or published as well. As part of those negotiations, we do want to always work with a company as we can to get them back to compliance. That's not something we would ever compromise. A facility in non-compliance must return to compliance with federal rules. So we will work with the company to ensure that by asking them to do more monitoring or testing, installing control equipment as required, or perhaps restoring or cleaning up areas that have been damaged by their noncompliance. Following the negotiations, we will go ahead and begin our enforcement response. There's a number of avenues that we can take with enforcements. Sometimes we may refer it back to the state, where we allow the state to take over the enforcement action and let them take the lead. We may also generally, for most cases, we will proceed to a civil action, usually in a civil administrative action conducted by the EPA itself. And then also we have the civil judicial action, which is where we involve the U.S. Department of Justice. This would be for cases that are high level, very complicated, or very large in scale, and we receive their assistance. And then finally, as Laurel had mentioned, if we see issues that may look like there's criminal occurrences going on, we can refer that to our criminal investigation division. So we're going to focus now on the civil administrative portion, since, as you can see here, this will be a large majority of how we handle cases. Next slide, please. With our civil administrative cases, we have a large number of outcomes. They can be as extreme as issuing emergency actions, where we require a facility to completely stop their production process until we can resolve concerns and return them back to compliance. The majority of them generally lead to notices of warnings or violations, where we reach out to a company. We let them know what our concerns are and what they will need to do to return to compliance. Alongside our enforcement actions, we will also generally assess a monetary civil penalty, as well as injunctive relief. And I'm going to talk about injunctive relief in the next slide. So when I speak of injunctive relief, this is the work that a company has to do just to return to compliance. So again, there's no compromising here. If a company needs to install a control equipment to meet the rule, then they will have to install that control equipment. And that's part of the injunctive relief. We can also do something including mitigation efforts, where we ask a company to offset previous harms. an instance of this would be if we find a company has exceeded their permitted limit for, say, air emissions, say by 5 tons per year, we may require that company not only to reduce that to the limit, but also reduce it another, say, 5 tons per year for a certain time period to offset what they've already done. So we call that mitigation. As well as, of course, with the injunctive relief, we assess civil penalties, which go alongside that, again, as primarily a deterrence effort. The assessed penalty is usually based on a large number of factors, some factors which increase the penalty and some which actually can decrease the penalty. Here's a list of some of those factors now, but they can also be simplified as well to simply, how bad was the violation? Have they done this before? Was this done knowingly, which that can skate upon whether or not it was criminal? And all these factors will likely increase the penalty, depending on the severity. Did they make attempts to fix it after they found this violation, or also have they been cooperative with the EPA as we do this enforcement action? That could be something that can reduce the penalty. Finally, did this noncompliance give them any type of economic benefit? For instance, if a company A installed a piece of control equipment to read a rule, to meet a rule, and company B did not, but instead used that money to, say, expand their process, then they're getting an economic benefit by non-complying. So we will always look to recovering any benefit they may have received from that non-compliance. So we're going to look at one specific example here. This is the Duke Energy Power Plant case, violations of the Clean Air Act. This is a plant, I believe, in North Carolina. And so with that case, they had both an injunctive penalty portion as well as a civil penalty. And then for the injunctive relief portion, the company was required to spend $85 million to reduce their emissions. This is likely made up of installing control equipment as well as operating that control equipment and any labor associated with it. They also spent $6.25 million on mitigation efforts to reduce what they've already done and to offset some previous harms, as well as $250,000 to restore forests affected by acid rain, which was one of the pollutants caused from this case. And alongside all of that injunctive relief, they still had to pay a $1.75 million civil penalty. So all in all, it was a $93 million penalty. As you can see, the majority of that penalty, again, just came from getting them back into compliance as a part of the injunctive relief. Switching tacks a little bit, we've discussed all of this information related to our investigations, inspections, as well as enforcement of what we're doing. But I believe one thing that may be interesting to you is, how do you know what we're doing? The EPA operates the ECHO site, it's Enforcement and Compliance History Online. And if you go to this site, you are able to look up any company or regulated facility in the country. At each of those, for each company, there is a facility page that goes over the inspection history of that site, as well as the rules that's regulated under, as well as any enforcement actions. So if you do have interest in a particular facility, I always recommend this as a great place to start to get a background of what is going on at that site and how the EPA or state and local partners have been involved. And then to wrap up, just going over some of the enforcement accomplishments we've done in 2023. This is for the EPA as a whole. You can see $704 million in assessed penalties, fines, and restitution. Large numbers of people protected by drinking water, huge reductions in pollutants. And as you can see, the majority of our inspections as well as our enforcement actions were accomplished in underserved and overburdened communities, or in other words, environmental justice communities. And then more specifically to Region 4, what we've conducted is 912 on-site inspections. And as similar to Sean said, some of these inspections may take half a day. Some of them could take a week or longer. And we've also, of course, have offsite monitoring events as well, where we may just simply request records and information to review. And of course, we've done a lot of work reducing air pollutants, restoring wetlands, and reducing and assessing penalties and injunctive relief. And with that, I think I'll wrap it up and pass it along back to Laurel.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Okay, so that's an inside look on how we develop our cases and determine different types of enforcement actions. So now we're going to look at how the community can become involved. We do a lot of work on our own with inspections, but we do rely on community members to be our eyes and ears and to alert us to things we may not see. So with that, I have Kanoi Ho with the Pesticides Enforcement section to speak more on this. Kanoi?
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Kanoi Ho, and I've been with the agency for about 7 years now, working in pesticide enforcement. So that is enforcing the fungicide or the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, also known as FIFRA. So like Laurel said, I'm going to talk today about community engagement. I'm going to go over a few ways that you can take action and get involved in environmental enforcement. And I'm also going to share some ways our enforcement actions have had a direct impact on improving communities. So when it comes to sharing information, the enforcement process is a little bit different than some other processes in the federal government, like rulemaking or permitting. Because when a case is active, much of the information is considered sensitive. So it's similar to something like a murder trial. Basically, in order to uphold a fair and open investigation, not jeopardize any of the negotiations or the potential outcomes, we do have to keep a lot of information confidential. So there will be some information that is still unknown and some limited pieces of information that can be shared, but the vast majority of information will not be shared until the case is actually closed. And then once it is closed, all that information becomes public knowledge and can all be accessed online. So with that being said, what are some ways that you can get involved with the enforcement process? So the first way is through our Report a Violation site, which we refer to as our Rev Tips site. This is probably one of the best ways that you can get involved because you can act as our eyes and our ears in your communities and workplaces to help us become aware of any environmental issues that may be going on. So if you see something, please say something. You can also submit the tips and complaints anonymously, if that's a concern. These do go directly to EPA headquarters, and then they get filtered down through the regions and through the different programs. Each program has their own way of tracking and following up on these complaints. So it is a great option for getting involved and getting us the information if you do see something of concern. The next tool we have is the EJ screen. So this is the environmental justice screening and mapping tool. Through this mapping tool, you can actually put in any sort of address for like a neighborhood or community that you're interested in getting more information about, and it will provide demographic, socioeconomic, and environmental information about that area based on public data. So through this tool, you can see, the various stressors or burdens that a particular community might be facing. So it's a really cool tool to use and play around with. We also have a tool called Echo. This is our enforcement and compliance history online tool. Like I mentioned, all of our cases, once closed, are uploaded online and they can be accessed through Echo. So to find a case, you can search by company name, or even, just a location or an address for your community, and you can see any sort of enforcement action that has taken place in the past with a company in that area. So it's just a way for you to be more informed about past enforcement actions and stay aware of what's going on in your community. So another way that you can get involved is through participating in public comment. So anytime that the agency is undergoing a change in things like regulations, or we're revising our rules, maybe we're reviewing the national priorities list or potential permits, or we've been making changes to some of our policies, we do open these things up for public comment. So the proposed version of the document is published to the Federal Register, and it's open for about 60 days, I believe. And during this time, you can review the proposed language before it's actually published, and provide comments. And we are required to review all of these comments. So it is a great way to make your thoughts and your opinions heard on potential actions that the agency is going to take. Okay, so now that we talked a little bit about how you can get involved, we're going to transition a little bit and talk about how our environmental enforcement can have direct impacts on the communities that these companies are in. And this is through supplemental environmental projects, or what we call SEPs. So we've referenced SEPs a few times throughout the presentation today, and we're finally going to get into, exactly what it is and how it fits into the enforcement process, and provide some examples of SEPs that have been done in the past. So here we have an outline of the enforcement process that we've presented today. Basically, we discover a violation occurred, we open up an enforcement case, we let the company know that there are corrective actions that they must take in order to come back into compliance. And then the agency issues penalties to settle the matter, which can either be monetary or injunctive relief, or both. And then in addition to those penalties, a company may volunteer to complete a SEP where they can invest some of the penalty directly into the community that was affected. So the SEP is voluntary and it cannot be used in lieu of any of the corrective actions, but is completed in addition to coming back into compliance. So what are the steps to completing a SEP? So the SEP would be proposed by the company that's in violation. The EPA then reviews the proposal, and we do have to ensure that the project is directly related to the nature of the violation. So once we approve it, the company completes the project and is required to submit documentation on what was completed. And a portion of the cost of the SEP is incorporated into the penalty amount, but it does not take over the entire penalty, just a portion of it. So in order to illustrate SEPs further, we're going to go through a few different examples. Okay, so our first example is about BP. So I'm sure we've all heard about the Deepwater Horizon Gulf of Mexico oil spill that happened in April of 2010, where the oil drilling rig Deepwater Horizon exploded, spilling approximately 4 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. In response to this incident, the EPA filed a complaint against BP and several other defendants who were alleged to be responsible for the spill, and for violating the Clean Water Act. Through this action, over $5 billion in penalties were assessed. And then in addition to that, BP and its counterparts agreed to spend over $10 million on a habitat protection SEP, where they were to purchase lands that were important to maintaining water quality in the Gulf of Mexico. So those were in the states of Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, and Florida. And they were to ensure that those properties were protected in perpetuity from any sort of development. And again, they spent around $10 million on this project. More recently, we had a case against Amazon. So Amazon was found to be illegally distributing unregistered and misbranded pesticide products. These products were being imported into the United States by overseas companies and being sold to consumers in the US. Amazon was found to have committed nearly 4,000 violations of FIFRA, which again is the Pesticide Act. And as part of their negotiations, they volunteered to do a SEP where they developed an online training course on the pesticide regulations and policies. This training course was to be publicly available to online marketers in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And in order to sell pesticides on Amazon, the companies would have to take this training in order to understand better the pesticide regulations. Also in 2018, we settled a case with Chevron. So we actually worked with the U.S. Department of Justice and the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality to settle a case against Chevron. This case involved multiple instances of releases of regulated chemicals at their oil refineries. These releases of chemicals actually resulted in fires and explosions at 5 of their refineries throughout the United States. So Chevron was found to be in violation of not only the Clean Air Act, but also the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, which we call CERCLA, and the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, which we call EPCRA. So in addition to their $3 million civil penalty, Chevron did conduct a SEP, and they provided emergency response equipment to the local jurisdictions surrounding their refineries in California, Mississippi, Utah, and Hawaii. And the equipment that they provided included fire engines, fire trucks, and some instruments to help detect if, there were any gas or chemical leaks in those areas. And they spent over $7 million on this project. Another, kind of high profile case was with Whole Foods. So Whole Foods, we discovered that they were not consistently making the correct hazardous waste determinations on some of their byproducts. So essentially, customers would return certain products that could not be restocked or resold after returning. These are things like cleaning products, detergents, batteries, pesticides, fluorescent light bulbs, things like that. They couldn't resell, so they had to dispose of these products, but they were not being handled correctly as hazardous waste. Because of that, they were found to be in violation of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, known as RCRA. And then as part of their settlement, they volunteered to do a SEP where they replaced all of the fluorescent lighting in public schools and community centers serving children located in low to moderate income areas. They also provided education to those schools and community center personnel about the hazardous waste laws and regulations that might apply to their operations. And they also provided this type of education to others in their retail industry, focusing on small retailers who may not have had access to the information. And they spent about 3.2 million on that project. So for our last example, we're going to talk about this case that's actually from the 90s against Jefferson County, Alabama. So the county actually owned the sewer system, and in the early 90s, they were found to be intentionally releasing untreated raw sewage from the sewer system and the treatment plants into the Black Warrior and Cahaba rivers. They were found to be in violation of the Clean Water Act on more than 14,000 counts. As part of their settlement, they did agree to do a $30 million SEP to restore, protect, and enhance the water quality of these two rivers, the Black Warrior and Cahaba River, and to prevent any future erosion or pollution. They did this by buying land along the river and maintaining those lands and protecting them in perpetuity. So once purchased, they did create greenways, hiking trails, bike trails, and they opened it up to public access so that all of these areas are now protected forever. So we actually do have a new program set up where members of the community can now submit ideas for community projects. We have a new email inbox at sepideas@epa.gov. So if you do have an idea for an environmental project that would be beneficial for your community, please let us know. We want to hear those. Thank you.
All right, thank you to Kanoi. So a few things I want to talk more on. One is that we're going to put the tips and complaints link into the chat so that you guys can access that at another time. And we're going to put another link in the chat about our event website, which at this point has told you about the details for tonight's event. But going forward after tonight, we're going to have more information on there. So we're going to potentially put some frequently asked questions on our website. We're going to put the recording up of the presentation tonight or the whole event. And then we're also going to have information later on after inspections are conducted in the Augusta area. So for example, if we may not have been able to get to your question tonight, I see we've had a few questions that we've been trying to answer. Some of those questions, I believe, need a little more looking into. Then we can potentially not only post those to the website for everybody to see, but also we will follow up on you because you all have your emails that you registered with tonight. So one thing I want to say is that, you know, as we are public servants here at the EPA, we talked about enforcement, but I also talked about regulatory. And for example, somebody had a permitting question. And it can be kind of confusing to understand exactly where your question may need to go. So we just want to iterate that if you do have a question and you're not sure if it's an enforcement question, please still reach out to us if you need to. We can always redirect your question to the proper division that can better answer for you. So thank you to Sean Taylor, who's also been answering questions for us in the Q&A for the state side. And that also speaks to the fact that sometimes when we have questions, we may need to contact our state and local partners to get answers from them as well to make sure we're all on the same page. So thank you to those who are asking questions. I hope that we've answered them as best as we can tonight, and feel free to follow up with us. So I'm going to put those links in there in just a second, but before I do so, we're going to have our final section for tonight, which is to tell you more about our environmental justice resources at EPA. And to speak more on those issues is going to be a representative from our EJ office, which is Beck Miguel Saunders Scholes. Beck, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm Beck, Beck Miguel. I'm from the Environmental Justice Community Health Environmental Division. I'm going to be talking about some of the environmental justice resources that we have. So start off. I want to talk about some of the funding opportunities that are available.
Beck, this is Brian. You may want to cut off your video so you can allow for hearing you. Seems like there's an issue. You coming off as mute? Why don't you give that a try? Thank you. Laurel, I can take over. Be glad
Sure.
to.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, everyone. So that was Beck. Beck is having some technical difficulties, but in the wings, we have Brian Holtzclaw, who is also a director at EJ. And I know they just formed a new division, so he can speak more on that. And he can also speak more on the funding opportunities for environmental justice. Thank you, Brian.
Wow, it's so glad to be here tonight. This workshop on enforcement has been such a long time coming. We're really glad you're a part of it. We're glad to be a part of it. To wrap this webinar up, I'm just going to offer some ideas that you as community members, community EJ advocates can consider going after. The first slide here is about EJ funding opportunities. These are one-of-a-kind opportunities. We have never seen these before in the lifetime of our environmental justice program. The first one is the EJ Grantmaker subgrants. These grants, which will be 75, 150, 250, and 350,000, are expected to begin in the fall of 2024. EPA has selected one grant maker for each of the regional offices. We have a grant maker that's going to be based out of North Carolina. We're going to work very closely with them on the notice for funding opportunities and also the beginning of the selection process as well. The second, and these are really well suited, I will add as a final note, that key eligible entity are in fact community-based organizations. So pay attention to that. We will keep you in the loop as long as you become part of our listserv. Community change grants are much bigger, much more competitive. We've already got a signal that 80 groups are applying. If it is indeed a state, local, or tribal entity, they must collaborate with a CBO, community community-based.org. As you see, the amount is very large and the deadline is November 20th. Next. So other funding opportunities, and just last night we had what we call Inflation Reduction Act Roadshow. We got on the road in Florence, and both headquarters in the region put on a great slideshow about all the wonderful funding opportunities, not necessarily EJ, but does fall within that lane as to helping overburdened, underserved, and disadvantaged communities. One is Solar for All. One is climate pollution reduction grants, air monitoring grants, clean ports grants, clean heavy duty vehicle grants. And we'll, before we send this out, we'll put the hot links on there so you all have a better understanding. And in fact, we might just add that IRA Roadshow presentation as well, posted to the website, which I'm sure Laura will talk to you about. Go ahead. And the last thing here is technical assistance. For the first time ever, EPA is hugely funding some technical assistance centers. Although their main lane is grant writing help, they do venture out in other kinds of technical assistance. And those two entities that were awarded funding to service the 8 states here in the region are the Deep South Center on EJ in New Orleans, and also the Research Triangle Institute out of Durham, North Carolina. Either one, these are hot link. If you go there, you can indeed go there and do an intake and talk to somebody as well as far as your technical needs go. Next. To wrap it up, I want to make a plug for a one-of-a-kind environmental justice overview. Last year, when we met with 8 states worth of community-based organizations in June, some of you may be aware of the Southeast EJ Network. They heavily advocated that all the groups, no matter mature CBOs or very green groups that are exploring fighting for environmental justice, ought to have a basic understanding of what environmental justice is. And that's exactly why we're offering this an EJ overview course. It is 2 nights from now from 6 to 8. You can register at that link. So we'll be sure to send this presentation out in a jiffy. It's going to be 2 hours. It's going to be chock full of interaction and understandings. Now, although the more mature groups may not want to participate, and that's just fine, we will have that recorded. Also, please take note of the EJ hotline. You can call that from 9 to 5. There is a reporting spills and environmental violations hotline that is run by the Coast Guard and EPA out of Washington. Now, they do intimately interact with all the regions as well as the states. So we as a collective can be responsive to environmental violations that are possibly out there. Also, if you want to be up to date on all these great grant opportunities, that's exactly how you become a part of our EJ headquarters listserv. And last but not least, if you like to get to know about our program and the staff like Beck, and we're so sorry you couldn't get that technical difficulty overcome, his name and a couple other new staff are listed there as well as their contact information. Next, if there is a next. Thank you. So here's some hot links to some of the great grant programs. And I am mistaken, those are the hot links right embedded there on the last page. And we greatly thank you for participation in today's webinar. And look forward to you possibly participating in Thursdays that we're sponsoring. We've sent over 1,000 emails out. We hope you're one of those that choose to register and participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. And yes, just as Brian said, we are going to provide all those resources he talked about, the slides and the links on our website. I did post a link for our event website in the chat, so I hope you're able to access that. If not, it should also be back on the registration as well. I believe we're going to grab the link for the EJ registration event on Thursday night and get that out to you in the chat as well. If you guys are interested, you can register for that. So again, all of our resources are going to appear on our event website after tonight's event. So thank you so much, Brian, for telling the audience more about environmental justice resources. As Brian said, that's our program tonight. So I hope you guys learned more about, again, how we enforce environmental laws at the federal level, at the state level, at least as a basic understanding. We thank you for your questions and attending, and again, taking time out of your evening. Thank you so much to our state partners, Sean Taylor and Jeffrey Williams, for also joining us to fill out the full picture of this topic. So that's our presentation tonight. And if we have any further presentations in the future to follow up about inspections, we will send them out to the same links that we sent this registration out to. So please, we hope you join us again. Have a great night.